This is Season 4, Episode 7 of my modular journey, and today we're taking a look at the Modular Maritime Decca module. The Modular Maritime Decca manual CV generator came in around October 26th of 2023, so almost a year ago. It was about $120 US. What it is, it is a manual control module, simply put. Historically, the Decca was a hyperbolic radio navigation system developed during World War II that helped with precision landings. I'm assuming of aircraft here, not aliens. Notably, the Decca system was deactivated in the year 2000 when GPS took over. Some of us might actually remember that. I first saw Decca in a SynthDad video, and since then, I've literally not found a single video on the entire interwebs about Modular Maritime Decca, including on their own website. It also took quite a while for me to find one available on Reverb, but I simply had to have it. I didn't have anything already where I could generate a gate or a trigger manually. And I found that when I was building envelopes, for instance, having to start and stop a clock repeatedly to test the envelope was annoying. Decca is basically a voltage source, a manual CV gate, and can even be used as a muting control module, which is not a thing I could see a use for, but it's capable of doing so. So let's look at the panel here. Decca has two voltage sources with 0 to 5 volt capabilities. Note that there are no negative voltages coming out of this module. Up here at the top, there are two voltage source knobs with locking gate buttons to open and close those gates. There are 4 temporary gate buttons that peak at around 4.2 volts when pressed. Gate 5 acts as a temporary mute button, which takes an in signal and passes it through the mute circuitry, and when the button is depressed, the signal coming out is, of course, muted. Sounds simple. Not entirely sure what the usage of this would be, but it's there if you need it. At the bottom are 2 more mute circuits that take signals in and route them to their out, and this time using a locking gate button. Also note that the LED intensity depends on the intensity of the incoming signal. So using Batumi LFO for an example, the higher my LFO signal, the brighter this LED will be. It's important to note a couple of pitfalls with this module, and one of them, of course, being that it's 0 to 5 positive volts only. No negative voltage is generated from Decca, since it's not really meant to be an attenuator or attenuverter module necessarily, but more importantly, the voltage stealing aspect of this particular module. I don't know of any other module in my collection that clearly warns lighting up our LED is going to cost you inline voltage. An example of this is using a Batumi LFO that sweeps -5 to +5 volts. Hold on, let me plug that in. Let me take data down to the voltage monitor, and I'll show you what this looks like. So keep an eye on data here. You'll see that it's sweeping -5 to +5 voltage. So that's a full LFO all the way down, all the way up, past 0, into the negative and into the positive. But when we feed this same LFO through Decca's gate 9, the Batumi sweep changes. So let's wire that up real quick. So this is going into the gate in here. I'm going to take a wire out right here to the green trace, and I'm going to enable that gate. I'm going to open that gate by clicking that button right there, see? So now that same exact LFO that was -5 to +5 is now only showing up as a -5 to a +1.8 volts roughly. I'm not clear why 3.2 volts is missing from the top. Surely lighting this little LED button doesn't cost that much voltage. Maybe somebody watching this video knows, but either way, this is not a use case for me for using Decca, so I'm not really worried about it. However, keep in mind that if a module requires 2.5 volts to trigger, for example, like Ornament and Crime here, then this would not even trigger the envelope going through Decca. Because the peak is -1.8. Even though this LFO is a 10 volt peak to peak range, and I know that's really confusing to me, so hopefully it makes sense to you. So yes, don't use Decca to trigger. I don't know why you would do this except to mute it maybe once in a while. You might want to mute it from doing that. I don't know. I'm not sure of a use case there. But anyway, so why would I choose Decca? And the answer is I simply wanted a manual CV gate option, and as a bonus, Decca is powerful yet lean in its 8 HP design. How I plan to use Decca, I only plan to use Decca as a gate and trigger like this. or for its voltage sources up here for manual exploration of other modules where control voltage is required. Decca will not be part of any of my creative patching, of course, but it will help with the development of those patches or demonstrations, kind of like this one here. So before I get into any demonstrations, let's talk about the build quality. Overall, Decca has a ton of outputs and buttons, and there are 2 voltage source knobs here at the top. These knobs are very wiggly, and I can see these snapping off pretty quickly with heavy use. So far, I've been smart enough to at least remember when reaching for one of these knobs to grab it carefully, because they are very wiggly. I'm not sure this is something I can fix, though I also wonder why I should have to fix something on a new module, but oh well, moving on. So I want to use it first to show you what triggers do, and I'm going to go through data with this to start with. So again, when I'm designing my envelopes, I like having a button I can just push and generate a trigger, right? You can see this. Well, let me pop this open here so you can see it. Boom, boom. Every time I press it, my envelope triggers and runs its cycle so I can test it without having to run a clock and wait for clocks. Because a lot of times I'm doing envelopes on random, so it just gets a little nightmarish to have to wait for clocks and turn Pamela's on and off or something continually. So this is really what I wanted to use it for, was just to send a trigger, kick something off, even start and stop sequencers or whatever. It's good to have this option right here. So the other thing I want to do is let me run some sound. Let me plug in some sound real quick. So the thing I want to talk about is the voltage source here, which is just a knob, and the knob puts out a voltage between 0 and 5 volts. So right now what I have it set up for is I want this knob to act as a trigger at 2.5 volts, which is what Ornament and Crime requires, to engage this VCA so we can hear that melody playing there. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to roll this up, keep an eye on Data's green trace here. Once it hits 2.5 volts, the Ornament and Crime will trigger. All right, I'm nearing 2.5 volts here. So what happened was the voltage source is just acting like I pressed a key on a keyboard and I'm holding the key down. So the gate is hung open at the sustain level here. So if I turn it just a little bit to the left to counterclockwise and go below 2.5 volts, the trigger closes and the LFO completes. That's all I was trying to show about 2.5 volts. So this was very hard to do using external controller because my hands weren't free for doing stuff because I'm an Italian. And so we need to have our hands free at all times. You know, mozzarella, rigatoni, parmigiane, provolone. Get it? Now I have a normal setup here where the sequencer is triggering an envelope, the envelope is then triggering the VCA, and the sound comes out. Normal. But now I can show you the real reason I would use Decca, and that's to, again, take this voltage source out, for instance, and put it into this CV jack of Ornament and Crime. This is the example I'm using right now, is just Ornament and Crime. So let me get my wires out of the way so you can see what I'm trying to do here. In Ornament and Crime, you have these CV overrides here. So there's 4 CVs, and there's 4 CVs in here, and I could say, what do I want this CV to change? And in this case, let me make it change the decay of this envelope. So now when I turn this voltage source knob and gain voltage, you can see the decay increases. So what does that sound like? Let's do it here. And that prevents me from having to come in here and manually turn the decay. So now during live performance or live recordings or something like that, I can have at least 2 voltage sources here that will change a parameter of one of my modules. And I could also mute it by turning off the gate. Now, if I want to be so bold, I can take a second one. Let's go to the CV2 here. I'm going to take the second voltage source. And now I got to, of course, program Ornament and Crime to do the thing with the second CV. So let's change the attack on this guy. So I'm going to turn on the button. So, in other words, it's kind of like an attenuator in a way. You're sending voltages out here to another module to change something. And that something could be, like here, in this case, it's the envelope shape or slope or timing or whatever. It could also be, you could put it into an LFO to change the frequency of your LFO or the shape of your LFO, whatever. It's anything that takes control voltage, you could then use these knobs to do that with. So that's kind of interesting, I thought. Now I want to take an LFO out of Batumi, but I'm going to run it through Decca only because I want to be able to mute it on and off as I need to. So for that, let me take a greenie out of Batumi into G9, which I guess is gate 9. And then here is out here. So this is out. Take another greenie out. And come on up here to frequency modulation. So now what we have is I have Batumi sending its full LFO to Decca, but now Decca is coming out to the frequency over here. So I can now turn this off and not modulate that right now, or I can turn it on and it will wind up modulating the frequency. So again, these are not necessarily things that I would use Decca for in my environment here. I mostly wanted to use it for voltage source for tweaking settings. Like live tweaking of settings. Or triggers, to just trigger something real quick. So that's it for the Modulaire Maritime Decca unit and why I bought it, how I plan to use it. Mostly for these voltage sources here to control envelope shapes like this live if I want to, or being able to use it for muting certain signals if I wanted to do that. I don't see myself really doing this, but I really like the triggering. There's 4 possible ways of triggering things here, which could be my 4 envelopes here in Ornament and Crime, for example. Coming up next is the Make Noise pressure points, which I also got similar to this one because I wanted something tactile that I can touch and make things happen. So stay tuned for that.